I'm Jeff Harold from Lake County Art League, and I'm here talking to Malik John-Marc Purvis, who was one of the five of the rising stars in the art world that were featured at the College of Lake County lately here. So, Malik, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, education, etc.?
I just want to preface this because you did ask me about it before. My name is Malik, by the way.
Malik, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no problem. I am from the South Shore neighborhood. I'm born in 1993. I come from a generation, long line of artists. I am the fourth in the Purvis family of painters. My grandfather was a figure painter and still life painter. And I grew up seeing his paintings in addition to my father's illustrations, um, which sometimes I post occasionally on my Instagram. But those are Instagram. Those are like illustrations of me in a much more cartoon format. So he's a different kind of artist than my grandfather. Um, after my father passed when I was about 11, I decided to take up that mantle. Personally speaking, not only as just an homage to him, but also just because I have a very deep affinity for the arts after that point. And I continue pursuing. I go to U of I to study painting and new media underneath Laurie Hogan. And then I spent some time in France studying both Manet and Cézanne's paintings. I also spent a little bit of time in Italy too, studying painting there. And then after that, I head back, and in 2019 is when I started attending Cranbrook Academy of Art for painting. Well, actually for sculpture, with doing painting at the same time. It's a much more free-form, oriented academic institution where you can do a little bit of both if you would choose. And I came out of that program doing large landscape paintings that are a lot more punchier and have installations that sometimes respond to them. As we'll talk about later in some of the paintings, they do have to deal with ideas of mental illness and other ways of perception and seeing. But I think also that another thing that I should mention is that I went to while I was at U of I studied in the perceptual lab because I was inspired by artists like Robert Irwin and James Turrell, who were studying with perceptual scientists back in the 70s because they were trying to understand how vision actually works. And I wanted to apply that to painting. I didn't want to leave painting per se, but I did want to, have a different understanding of painting and how to apply that. And so I use those same techniques to make more complicated and, visually interesting paintings that still have to do with mental illness and stuff like
Okay, good. I've got the detail of one of your paintings right here behind me here, and let's see if we can take a look at it, and you can talk about that a little bit.
that. Okay,
Uh,
give me that.
okay,
Okay. This is landscape 20, reflection in a pool of water. I painted this back in March. It's about 5 feet by 5 feet. Oil on drop cloth canvas that you can actually find at Home Depot. I was actually inspired to make this painting at Lake Cook River near, or is I'm not sure if that's the exact name of that river, but it's on the exact you know crossing of where you get into Buffalo Grove.
okay,
And Me and my girlfriend were hiking, and I saw this reflection in a pool of water, and or more rather like a marshy area because the area is associated with a lot of, like a swampy environment. And then as I was passing it, I noticed that when I looked into the water, I couldn't tell the difference between the sky and what was being reflected around me. It felt like it was a different area altogether. And I wanted to capture that moment. There's a feeling of kind of being thrown off into a different area when it seems almost not attached to time itself. There's a bit of, image critique in there, but there's a lot of, just thinking about how I'm seeing things and how to portray this feeling of being disoriented.
yeah, yeah. When I looked at I got the feeling that I was looking through something, or woods, or leaves, what have you, into something farther back, brighter light. I'm sort of having trouble explaining exactly the way I felt about it, but it was like, let's go to the distance. It's light there, and you're coming out of the darkness and going into the light type thing.
Right.
So that may not be the way you intended it or other people see it, but the one thing I found out is that I created an image. It means one thing to me. It always surprises me when I hear other people say, "Oh, this is what I see in it."
Oh, definitely. I think that the most important thing to me is that somebody gets a very personal and visceral experience in looking at it. I scale these things up, so maybe up to 5 feet, so people have an idea of what it physically feels like to look at something like that.
Yeah.
But it was never, I don't seek with the majority of my paintings for someone to like get the point. It's more of an experience based thing.
Yeah, but I agree. To me, art, especially if you're doing like abstract or modern, contemporary, whatever you're doing, uh, it really is up to the viewer and his total sum of his experiences as far as how he's going to perceive that.
Definitely. I think I've spent enough time painting where I obviously get those moments where I've been making it for so long that I can't, detach myself from, the fact that somebody else is going to look at this and, not completely physically see what I'm getting at. I always paint these, and I feel like when I'm looking at it myself, I'm just like, I know exactly what this is. I know exactly what it is I'm painting. Um, but there is this moment where, and I've had this discussion with another artist, Natalie Wadlington, where we talk about you have those ideas in your head of what you're going to execute, and when you make it, it's a whole different story. There's a whole different thing being said and what it wants to say personally, and you're kind of responding to that. You're kind of at its whim when making those kinds of decisions sometimes.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is that you're going to start with something. You have an idea, but that may not be how the way it ends up. Because
Right.
once you start getting into it, it's sort of like it has a life of its own. It says, "I want to go this way."
Right. I think, I think one of the most important things I should put out there too is that when I start these paintings, I start with a general black and white sketch. I don't even start with color. I think I when I paint colors onto the canvas, I kind of try to make them respond to each other in a way that you know feels cohesive, that works
Yeah.
into it, rather than coming at it always 1,000% planned. I have an idea of the framework, the size, and everything, as you mentioned. But when I get to that execution part, there are some things that I just can't account for, like the branches that come through this painting. I remember painting that and thinking to myself, I had no idea that I was going to make that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had some of the same experience. I don't do straight abstract like these. Like this is something like this. But I've had stuff where I've started out in one direction, and all of a sudden it just morphed into something a little bit different.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So uh, let's. How about if we go to your website for a second and
Definitely.
let's take a look at that? Okay, because I find it very interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, what I find most interesting about this, besides your artwork, it's the way you have it organized,
Mhm.
because you have it by year. You go to most websites, even mine, other artists, and it's usually, maybe they have current work listed, but it's usually like categories like landscape or portraits or
Right.
whatever. What I like about yours, and if I can look at it a little bit, is you've got it. You've got it based on year,
Right.
and so it gives a nice way of viewing your work, as it progressed.
Mhm.
Let's
I
go back
think
here.
of
Okay, so like here's 2018,
mhm.
and I see a lot of detail, line drawings, what have you. But then when you go up here to 2019, it's like your style or subject changed.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that a little bit as far as the change between the 2 years?
Yeah, so that's actually the year that I started attending Cranbrook, and part of me, the program is designed to, make you question your motives. I felt in me that I wanted to be a portrait painter, but the more that I did it, the more that I thought about it, I was thinking of myself, I'm making these experiences, and I have in some of the other paintings that you kind of look at too, there's a bit of a cartoony style to it. That's kind of a nod to my father, but also I grew up drawing comic books and looking at TV cartoons and stuff like that, and so there's a little bit of that in there, but with serious subject matter. I started to make a transition back to landscape painting because you see in 2018 there's some landscape painting in there, but I did that preemptively because I thought to myself, well, if I need to make a distinct statement with what I'm doing, it needs to be a clear trajectory personally for me, and I need to reorganize my ideas a little bit more thoroughly. And so that led to kind of radical kind of change in the kind of painter that I am. That's partially why I kind of go by year. I have friends that are basically the same age as me and went to the same program as me that organized their website differently. And I chose it to go by year because I see it as like a very distinct trajectory of ideas and thoughts. Um, I'll kind of end this by saying that like every painting to me seems like in a sequence that is kind of responding to the last. I try to not make the same painting twice in my head.
Yeah.
So it's landscape one, landscape two, and you kind of get to the 20th one, and it feels like a little bit, you know, further further away from those other thoughts that I had
Yeah.
maybe even like a year ago.
Yeah. And if we go to 2020,
Hmm.
again, I see a change.
Right.
So I was wondering if I can get scroll down a little bit. I also wanted to ask you about, you got into some, it looks like installation. I know you have this one.
Hmm.
This is interesting. I like this guy because it looks like it's a hole in the wall, the way you've got it set up. And I don't know if you
Right.
were intending that or not, but
Um,
and and then the other one over here, this guy, you can
right.
see it, the dimensions of it.
Right. Like it's it's okay. So these are a little complicated, and I'll tell you why. Because at the same time as I'm making these kind of steps forward and what I'm doing, I'm in a sculpture program.
Yeah,
I was in a sculpture program for 2 years, and I was surrounded by sculptors, and really thinking to myself as a painter, where does that lie in terms of what I'm doing? What am I doing that has to do with space because, as I mentioned before, I did have a lot of thoughts about perception, about personality, about how you see things. And I started venturing out to make these more immersive landscapes. If you look at these bottom row paintings, the painting that you even brought up just now, that's a laser pointed at the bottom. And then on the left, yeah, even on that one that you're at right now, that's a laser level.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to, like, I'm making landscapes, but I'm also trying to ground them in space, like actual personal space. And it comes into this discussion for me of, you know,
So,
how can I make a different kind of viewing space for these?
yeah, let me ask you about this one in particular.
Mhm.
Is that really a corner of the wall, or have you actually constructed the paintings, the frames, and everything to appear to be at a corner? And the laser
So that
is,
actually is a corner of a wall.
oh, this corner? Okay.
Yeah. Those
Either,
are four separate panels. So
okay.
quad. I can't. I don't remember the exact name for that. But these they're actually the two on the left are a little bit longer than the ones on the right, but merged together they're about the same length.
Yeah.
That's so that when they meet in that corner, that you seem it seems like they're flush. They kind of complement each other too. They have similar compositions, but in different directions.
Yeah.
Um, and they kind of speak to each other by being in the corner that way.
And they're similar enough in composition, color, and everything that they look like they almost could be one painting.
Right.
So
Right.
they sort of merge. So yeah, I that's interesting. I like that. Okay. Uh,
Mhm.
any one of these in particular you want to discuss before I go to the next year?
Um. mm, so you did bring up installation. I think that one of the biggest ones that I felt was a turning point, and we can talk about it, is the one with the light picture that has the two paintings of the portrait painting there. So
Oh,
do you
you're
see the
talking
yellow on the right
about
one?
this guy?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll briefly run through that one, and then we can move on to the next year because I feel like this is a crucial piece for me personally speaking.
Okay.
This was made at the end of my first year at Cranbrook. So I made these, they're about 4x5 each, or 4x3 each, correct me. And they are, they're meant to kind of portray kind of um, eye floaters in your eye. But the way that you
Oh,
see it as a person that is looking at it, you kind of have to block the light. The light's supposed to be on, it's off currently for the sake of the photo. But in that photo, you're supposed to hold your hand up so you can actually look at the photo. But in the process, you kind of mimic that exact thing that's on the wall. And
okay.
then on the right, there's the result of like damaged vision. These are kind of me moving away from portraiture and trying to incorporate that kind of environment into the painting that I think that I couldn't exactly convey to you guys over at the Rising Stars exhibition because I'm a little bit, attached to the wall here, so to speak. But when we get to 2021, I kind of figure out a different way to deal with that.
Okay. So you're basically trying to represent the way people sometimes see the world, depending
Yeah,
upon their eyes and their you know emotional state or whatever at the time that they're viewing it.
right. It's it's more of a I think I have always thought about the viewer as part of the artwork too. When I
Yeah.
look at or make a painting, I'm trying to imagine in my head how are these people coming up and looking at him. I saw the other one in the corner, and I'm thinking to myself, if somebody wants to go and look at that painting, they have to step in front of that laser. They become part of that piece they're pointed at.
Yeah.
So with this one, it's the same way. It's just like they're a little bit more self-aware of that if they're really paying attention to it. They kind of have to acknowledge, that they're making the same pose, and that was part of the kind of piece to me, is to kind of establish that the people in looking at it are part of it too.
Yeah, and the light being on, I can see where that would make a difference to the people standing there
Definitely.
looking at it. Because, like you say, they would actually have to assume that position, the blocks under the light, to really see the work.
Right.
All right, good. I like it. Okay, I think this is 2021.
Right.
Yeah, and some of these were at the College Lake County, the Wright Gallery. So
Right. A few of them were considered, but we at later points said that they should not be shown, only for different reasons. We were thinking about how would these paintings work together, along with other paintings.
yeah,
I I thought about a few times, making big paintings, and when you make a big painting, you have to say to yourself, if I'm in a group show, these things are gonna like dominate the space. So we're thinking about, putting these big works in there, but also really kind of thinking about how they work together themselves too.
yeah, that's a good point.
But
Uh,
feel free to ask me anything that you want about these paintings. They are very different than any of the other paintings from before.
yes,
They have like a very interesting kind of you know way to be looked at and taken in. So if there's anything that you personally have seen in it or you've noticed about it, I can kind of address those questions too. But I will also be able to kind of elucidate on some other stuff a
well,
little bit
I
later.
yeah, I'd like to talk about these two over here. These installation type.
Hmm.
What's what's the impetus for that? Or
Hmm. So I'm thinking of uh, there was a lecture that we had very briefly at the end of the year. These were made in May of this year. I made them mainly because I felt as though I didn't really make a full on kind of sculpture that had nothing to do with any of my paintings. I felt that everything that I had been making before had like something to do with my paintings. And I just wanted, right after graduating, I just felt like I wanted to give myself the freedom to just make something.
yeah,
These are fairly large. I want to say they're about 4 feet in diameter, approximately. I can give you an exact size on that. But can you click on one of those pieces for me?
anyone in particular?
Top one, bottom. I like the top one, but if you see if the bottom one is a little bit clearer, that would be okay too.
This one?
No, no, no. So I'm talking about the circle ones that we were talking about, the installation ones.
Oh, down here. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you look at the title and you look at the conditions that I put on the side, I kind of lay out that even though I'm documenting this right now,
yeah,
these pieces go on to have a very different life throughout the entire day that they're shown.
yeah.
They're meant to be like a kind of clock almost. So on the left, if you're looking at the top left portion around the outer rim, around that darker dirt up there, there are
Ah,
holographic stars that I had made.
I had
Um,
not seen
it's
those.
right, right. It's difficult to kind of see them. I have other photos of it, but this seemed like the biggest one to get all of it in one go. And the
Yeah,
way that my website is kind of structured, it makes it kind of difficult. Um, but there's holographic stickers that I had made, custom made, that reflect the light in the room. And then on the opposite side, in that sand portion, are children's glow in the dark stars. Um, I was thinking about as a kid when you're having your first kind of um, experiences with mental illness, you may not even know what's going on. There's a real kind of not there's a real kind of unclear understanding of how long does this last? Where is it coming from? Does it have a specific time of day or a specific way that I'm supposed to work with this? And I kind of wanted to get back to that. There is this
Yeah.
idea that I'm working with these kind of really raw materials from outside and also these synthetic materials that kind of respond to this. Hey, I'm having a very personal, deep, like experience that I'm trying to relay in a way that only I can understand as a kid. Holographic stickers take me back to, playing cards when I was a kid. And so they have this way that if you walk around it and you kind of deal with it, they kind of change depending on how you see things. So at night it glows, and during the daytime it kind of it shines, and that's a different kind of contrast that comes from not it's different than what I can provide and what my paintings show.
Yeah. Yeah. That I understand. That makes sense. And that's it really. I sort of, from the title, I sort of figured that's what you're doing. But it's nice to have the background like that of what your process
Right,
was, your thinking was. Yeah.
right.
Uh,
I just briefly say this. I did think about people not being able to see the stars. That's why I put the materials in the side. So if anybody is going through these paintings and is looking at stuff, the materials are really key, especially these paintings from this year, because they play a factor into how some of them are photographed and how you go about and look at some of them.
yeah.
And if you go to the show at Rising Stars, they have a different kind of presence than what I can provide in the photos.
Yeah. Okay. I was sort of interested in this one
Hmm.
because, to me, you just have it listed as landscape as above, so below,
Hmm.
which really it looks like you have multiple landscapes that sort of merge, at least vertically, in order to create an overall landscape. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like you're looking at a nighttime view of a field or whatever, and
Hmm.
you're seeing the different components of it in layers.
Hmm.
Is that
And yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that you can take this, and I like that you kind of picked up on the feel of thing. But there's also I can't really show it to you, but in that black portion up there, there's a light velvety kind of rich acrylic paint that I didn't list on there accidentally, but
yeah,
it has like a ombre to it compared to the starry night sky above it. Um, it's mostly just kind of a collage of different textures. I'm thinking about actually being almost underground and trying to make out what the night sky looks like, but also the only way that you can kind of look at those kind of pillars there are they're pillars of light that are changing the landscape.
yeah.
um, I, when
Okay.
I don't think that a lot of people can visually see that, but there are a lot of different moves that I made through this painting. That as I was painting, I was like, oh, well, if I add this, oh, well, if I alter this, this is to me a very kind of raw painting that I probably will respond to in the future.
Yeah. All right. I like them. Actually, uh, a couple of them in one of your previous years
Mm-hmm.
actually gave me some ideas from stuff I'm going to work on. So one of the reasons I enjoy seeing other artists work and other types of media is it also inspires me to go in a different direction.
Mm.
So, okay. All right. Anything else you want to talk about on this page or your website?
For sure. I feel like I could also say a couple of brief things. Um, if you guys do happen to have the time to go and see these, I would really encourage you to do so. They don't come out, the larger paintings in particular. I'm thinking of the top first three. They don't come out that often because they are very large. They're not,
Yeah.
easy to transport or to show. So if you do have the time and go and see them, do see them in person. If they do have a different kind of experience, like the top left one
Yeah.
has day glow on top, but you can't visually see that in the photo. So
Yeah,
there's a lot.
I didn't see that. I was over there. Actually, I teach over at CLC. And
Mm,
so I was over and I saw the show.
right.
And like I say, I was impressed with all the artists there. So,
Mm. And I would deeply encourage anybody else that is going to go and see those paintings and artworks to go and see those in person. There are some people there that are doing works that I feel like, um, are much, much better in person. Um, for instance, Richard Medina's paintings, they look like their photos and like
yeah.
strictly photo collages
Oh,
that
yeah.
they had
Oh, yeah.
on them. So there is a lot there that I feel like while we're talking about it, we can have a great discussion about it. But it's really I felt that like this show in particular had a lot to do with people being able to kind of visually take in something that they can't get through like Instagram or Facebook or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. 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 You mentioned Richard's Medina's pictures. And
Mm,
one of the things I want to talk to him about, I'm hoping to be able to interview him also. But one of the things is some of the things he used. They remind me of the way he wrote. Like for one, it has fall written on it,
yeah,
and the letters
right.
go down, and it's to me it's totally reminiscent of the poet E. E. Cummings because he would
Okay.
actually he wrote his poetry no punctuation or anything, and he'd break it up and he'd combine words. He'd make up words like mud luscious, okay, to
Mm,
describe the feeling of the mud in between your toes as a little kid,
right.
you know. And so, there were a couple other things that I thought I recognized myself that I want to ask him about and
Yeah,
see,
no,
and see
definitely.
why he did them.
He's got a very kind of unique mind. We can't. He came from a different program. We have similar kind of influences. He likes Jose Lerma, and studied with him. He's another kind of textural kind of painter.
Yeah,
And looking at his stuff, you can kind of see that he's kind of talking about American folklore, all this other stuff. So if you happen to have a conversation with him, it's a wonderful piece for the eye to really talk about to see.
yeah.
But I think it will be like really really interesting to get an idea to how he sees culture and American culture and what he's painting because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk to him about that. So, but back to you for a second. I
Mhm.
agree 100%. Any artwork like this, you get more out of it when you can go and see it in person. So,
Definitely.
with that being said, here's the chance for you to plug your upcoming shows. So, what do you
Yeah.
got planned?
So I don't have an immediate upcoming show, mainly for the reason that it has been delayed. But in Garfield Park, I will be doing a two-person show that will be another installation. It will be with the artist Kelly Croner. She's from Detroit, or just outside of Detroit. Oh, correction. She went to Cranbrook with me, but She's from Ohio. She does similar work in the realm of you know landscape and understanding the biological area. So that will be one to look for in the upcoming days. I'll put that up on my Instagram when that fully comes about. We plan to publicize that in the early first quarter of the year, and then in about a year or so, I'm working towards this. This is way out, but I'm working towards a solo show of paintings over in Florida. So I have, my mind in a lot of different places at the moment, and I am also working on another group exhibition on other artists that deal with both mental illness and disability, but thinking about it not strictly from the language of, hey, this is the worst thing that I go through, but how do we live with it? How do people like interact with people that have these things going on?
Yeah.
If anybody wants to get in touch with me or to talk to me about any future projects, this is my website here. Jeff has been really kind enough to put that here.
Yes, and
But
I just want to highlight that you can either just Google Malik Purvis, or
mm,
if you're going to type in this email, don't forget the JM in between the Malik
yeah,
and Purvis.
yeah.
Because you snuck that in, and I tried to go there directly, and I didn't find it. Okay.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I think my website should be the first thing that comes up these days, but the JM Purvis it's an honorary
Yeah.
name, so I like to keep the full name there in all
Yeah.
formats.
Yeah. But you can't just Google Malik Purvis, and it will bring you up.
Right.
So that's a good part there. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a personal question. Uh, uh, just because I've had some experiences, you talk about perceptual psychology, and I'm always interested in how an artist, when they paint something like an abstract, something like that, is that coming from their own mind, their experiences? And I'm asking this because I had an abstract and it's totally different meaning to me, but I sold
Mhm.
it, and the person that bought it made the comment that it was the way his mind felt when he
Mhm.
looked at it. And
Well,
I've had people buy my work and say that, oh, this reminded me of such and such. I was over in France and in Paris, and I didn't get anything, but your work reminds me of that. So I'm
mhm.
familiar with that equivalency from an experience, but not necessarily from a mental state standpoint.
Mhm.
Is that
Right.
something that is common that you've run into?
Um, you know, I'll give you two answers, and I'll try to be really succinct with those answers.
Okay.
So I always like to think back to a couple of quotes that drove me through that kind of situation that you're dealing with. We were talking about an undergrad with my professor, who's my mentor, Lori Hogan, and she was saying you can put all of that language in there, you can put all of this stuff in there, you can even put your own personal experiences in there. I personally believe that every single time that we return to a painting, we're putting those moments into that painting progressively. Whether,
Yeah.
we're having an emotional state that is one way, but we may come back maybe a few days later and that emotional state is completely different and we're painting something else or we're
Hmm.
focusing on something else. But the more abstract a work gets, the more conceptual a work gets, um, people tend to gravitate to artwork with their own perceptions. I think, especially within the case of like abstract art, you look at in the field of color and you make sense of it through your own perspective. You think about like a Rothko or any of those older abstract expressionist kind of paintings. I'm not necessarily privy to that, but I even think that even in the case like you're sitting in front, your background is my painting that is also a more homage to like Monet, and those are like moments that when somebody else comes and gets those artworks, I've had people tell me so many times that my artworks are abstract, and I have nothing against that. I've come to accept it, but initially I had a lot of reservations about being called an abstract artist because I always felt that these were very concrete, that these were saying something in particular. Um, But I think back to what my professor said, and I realized that it's more of like a people look at images and they see a language of communication. They see,
Yeah.
colors and forms, and they see a language that doesn't have words, and they're applying their own memories to kind of connect that to themselves in a sense of kind of, oh, well, I get what, like if they look at the word blue, they're thinking of a color blue. It may not be your blue, it may be their blue, and they're bringing that into that context.
Yeah.
So if I'm painting a landscape, they may not have known where I was taking it from, but they know for a fact that if they look back into it in themselves and they're like, oh, well, this reminds me of a moment that looks like a tree or
Yeah.
looks like a river or a moment that I've had. So I think that they're relating it back in a kind of language way to kind of make sense of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now,
but that's
I,
the answer I have.
I'm sorry. I fully agree with you because by the actual definition of the abstract, yours are not abstract paintings. Okay,
Right,
because
right.
the actual definition of an abstract is that it has no relation, no emotional value, no. It's not a representation of anything, and that is the actual, actual definition of abstract. What would you consider your painting?
I
It,
would, I over over time, it shifted. Initially, when we go back to like these 2019 paintings, I was thinking to myself, I am an illustrator who never became an illustrator, who failed at that and just became a painter. And so I thought of myself as just like a cartoonist that was making, very serious art statements.
yeah,
And then a little bit later, it turned into um, I see these as translations of an experience or like a scene from a memory that I feel is very concrete. But when I make those works, they turn into something that feels very present. I
yeah,
could say that they're landscapes at any given time, but I most concretely say that they're like abstract landscapes.
yeah. Okay, we will go with that
No
then.
long-winded, but
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I don't have too much else at this point. Anything else you want to say or talk about or throw in the mix?
um, uh, I want to say that if anybody out here is from where I am, do consider because I'm from a rougher place, and I'm pretty sure when I share these out there, I'm also a teacher too. That if anybody thinks that these paintings came about spontaneously and without much effort, they did not.
I
That it
don't
takes
believe they
years
did.
to really even be able to work yourself up to like a 5 by 5 foot painting or 6 by 6 foot painting. They were a challenge and arduous thing. I'm glad that they're getting a lot of positive reception.
Yeah.
But I want to say that if anybody else is making artwork or making paintings, that I think I've always thought of it personally as a slow and easy kind of process rather than let's go at it, let's see the end result immediately. I want it now, let's get it. I'm 27, I've been making artwork since I was about 4 or 5. I've always had those moments where I thought that like art was, a thing that, you develop, you always had in you, and it would just magically, spontaneously come out like a talented kind of thing. But if you are a younger person that just realized that it is a very long, arduous process, but your life is expressed through these artworks.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's well said. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're all going to look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Sure.
And I thank you for taking the time and being patient with me up front when I had those little technical issues. Okay.
It comes with the territory,
Yeah. Yeah, I try to minimize those whenever I can. you know.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for your time.
No, thank you. I'm honored to be interviewed by a group of artists. I take you as an individual, but you also represent the Lake County Art League, so I take it as a serious kind of honor to
Yeah,
be interviewed by you,
and I'm sure they're going to enjoy listening to this.
for sure.
So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.